Okay, so we've gone through and talked about labeling our sides with opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. And I'm reminding us that if you put the opposite over the hypotenuse, you're writing a sine ratio. If you put the adjacent over the hypotenuse, you're doing a cosine ratio. And if you put opposite over adjacent, you're doing a tangent ratio. So katoa. So what we have here is kind of a mix of what we were just doing, and we're finally going to actually use our calculators. So we are going to find a missing side length. That's the whole point of, well, half the point of using trigonometry. So in each of these pictures, there's a right triangle. In each of these pictures, there's a side labeled x that we don't know. So our goal is going to be to find that side length. But I'm not going to do anything until I have my picture labeled. So I'm going to label the opposite, the adjacent, and the hypotenuse. I'm going to start with the hypotenuse because here's my right angle. Across from our right angle will be the hypotenuse. Then I'm going to label the two legs, O and A, opposite, adjacent. Opposite means on the other side of the triangle. Adjacent means next to. So in this picture, here's a leg and here's a leg. We're always talking about with respect to the angle. Now in these previous problems, the angle was a G or a T or an X. Sometimes though, the angle is a number. So in this picture, there's an acute angle labeled 25 degrees. That's the angle from which I'm going to do all my labeling. So of these two legs that I've shaded in, this one over here is across from the 25, while the X is right next to the 25. Therefore, X is adjacent and the blank one is opposite. Now that one's blank. I don't need it in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to ignore it. Which leaves me with two labeled sides, the hypotenuse and the adjacent. And if you look up at our shortcuts, at our mnemonic, so katoa, there's only one ratio that doesn't use the opposite leg. There's only one ratio that uses the H and the A, and that's cosine. We are going to write a cosine ratio. So that's how we narrow down which of the three to do. Unless the problem tells you to do all three, it's up to you to figure out which of the three to do. So we just figured out it's cosine based off of the labels. That's why you have to label your picture. So I'm going to write a cosine equation. There's a format to this. After you write sine, cosine, or tangent, you will always put the angle. In this case, the angle that I labeled A and O from was 25 degrees. So I'm going to put cosine of 25 degrees. Then you always put the equal sign because cosine of an angle is equal to some ratio. Specifically, the ratio will be the adjacent leg over the hypotenuse. So I'm going to put the adjacent leg x over the hypotenuse of 7. So it's really similar to example 1. It's just on example 1, the whole left-hand side was started for you, and we had two numbers on the right-hand side. Here, we have a number on the left and then a letter on the right. It's a bit different because this one, we're solving this equation. I want to know how long that adjacent leg is. So I'm going to try and get this solved for x. The easiest way most students tend to have success with this is to think of it as a proportion. So you could think of this side being over 1, and we're going to cross multiply, which means I'm going to take x times 1. X times 1 is x. And it's going to be set equal to, when I cross multiply the other side, 7 times the cosine of 25 degrees. So we're going to do two different things. That's what these two blanks are. One of them is, what are you going to put in your calculator? What is x actually equal to? That's what I just wrote down. 7 times the cosine of 25 is what's going in my calculator. Then you'll see these approximate signs. We are going to get our actual answer to the nearest tenth now. So I'm going to pick up my calculator. And again, there are two main styles of calculators. One that goes forward and the natural feeling way to do it, and the one that's kind of backwards. So I'm going to show you the forwards way first. So it was 7 times the cosine of 25. So I'm going to type in 7 times cosine 25, close my parentheses. I'm getting 6.3. Now, if you are using a backwards type A calculator, like the phone calculators, sorry, I didn't have it pulled up yet. So remember, you have to turn them sideways, Did I already turn my screen lock on? I didn't. What's going on? Have to actually open up my phone. Sorry, wasn't prepared. So, turn it sideways. 7 times the cosine of 25. Here's why we hate these calculators. You will have to type in 7 times 25 cosine equals. You're going to get the exact same answer, but you have to do some weird work. So again, the backwards calculators is 7 times, so just like here, I did 7 times, but now I can't just type in cosine of 25. These calculators, you have to type in the angle first, and then say, take the cosine of that angle, and go ahead and multiply it for me. So 6.3 is our nearest 10th answer, no matter which type of calculator you happen to be using. So x is about 6.3 units. So let's do another one. Always, 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 always start by labeling your picture. So here's my right angle. Across from the right angle is always the hypotenuse. The other two sides that are not the hypotenuse are the legs. One of them will be opposite, one of them will be adjacent, and it's opposite from the acute angle, next to the acute angle. The only acute angle that's labeled here is the 65, so I'm going to be using that. So next to that 65 is the 11. Across from the 65 is the x. So I have all 3 of my labels on here. I don't need 3. I need either O and H, A and H, or O and A. So I got to figure out which one isn't used. And the only one that doesn't have a variable or a number is the hypotenuse. We don't need the hypotenuse for this problem. And if I look at my shortcuts, SOHCAHTOA, the only one that doesn't have an H in it is tangent. So I'm going to be writing a tangent ratio. But always, after you write sine, cosine, or tangent, write the angle next. Whether it's a number or a variable, whatever angle you wrote your labels from, that's what goes next. And in my case, the 65 was the angle. So tangent is 65, and then my ratio is O over A, opposite over adjacent. Now I'm trying to find x, so I'm going to cross multiply. I'm going to put this side over 1. X times 1 is still just an x. And on the other side, I could do tangent of 65 times 11. Typically, I put the 11 first so I don't mess up with my calculator. So again, some calculators will do 11 times the tangent of 65. Some calculators will do 11 times 65 tangent equals. But our approximate answer should be 23.6. Now I want to point out my calculator did say 23.589, blah, 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 blah. I'm rounding to the nearest 10th. That 8 makes that 5 round up. So what I put in for x into my calculator was 11 times the tangent of 65. This is the approximate answer that came out. So one more of this type. Start with labeling my picture. I always start with the hypotenuse because personally I feel like that's the easiest one to label. So 11 is the hypotenuse. Now I have to label the legs. The legs are always labeled from the acute angle. This time my acute angle is up here. It's the 78. So this x is not next to the 78. X is this side, and it's nowhere near the 78. It's on the other side of the triangle. That makes it the opposite leg. The one that's not labeled is the leg that's next to my angle. Therefore, it's the adjacent leg. But it's not labeled, so nobody cares about it. I have a hypotenuse and an opposite. I don't have an adjacent. The only one of these 3 trig functions that uses H and O, the only one that doesn't use the adjacent leg, is sine. So I'm going to put sine of my angle is equal to the opposite leg over the hypotenuse. And I got that using this, SOHCAHTOA. Put it over 1 and cross multiply. X times 1 is x, and on the other side the equal sign will be 11 times the sine of 78, which is redundant that I keep writing this twice. The next video I'll show you why I have extra space for this. But for now, I'm just going to write, this is what I'm about to put in my calculator. When I take 11 times the sine of 78, I get 10.75. The 5 after that 7 makes that 7 round up. So about 10.8. SOHCAHTOA is very important. Your labels are very important. And then it's just solving an equation from there. Example 4 is going to be really similar to that, but there is definite differences.